So let's look at the display property. Especially we are going to talk about inline block and inline block. Okay, so block, inline and inline block, these three we are going to see. By default, every element in HTML already has a display property set, but you can change it. For example, let's look at this one. So we have a HTML file, and in the HTML file we have two paragraphs, hello and world, and then hello beautiful world is another paragraph, and then we have used span. Okay, so now if you observe it, if you see the output, I have given borders. So borders are given to all the elements so that you can see which element you are talking about. So paragraph element, if you see it, the paragraph element has taken the entire width. The complete width is taken because by default its display property is block. Whenever the display property is block, then the entire width is taken, and this paragraph is also taking the entire width. But if you observe it, this element span is not taking the entire width, it is only taking the size that is sufficient to display beautiful. Okay, so why this has taken that one is because it is inline, its display is inline. Now whenever you have a display set as inline, it will allow the other elements to come after it. It is not going to take the entire space. It will allow the elements below it to take this space. Okay, so now if you change the display property of span to block, by default span is having display property of inline. Now we are changing it to block. Then you can see that now that span is taking the entire space in the row. I mean in this particular line, it is taking up the entire space because now it is block. Okay, so next thing that you have to understand here is, for the block elements you can also set height and width. For example, here to paragraph element, let's give some height and width. Height of 100 and width, anyway height is sufficient, width is not required. So you can set both height and width. You can see that the block elements are taking height and width properties, but you cannot give to a inline element. For example, to span, if you give height, it should not take. If you give height of 100, span is not changing because it is inline. Okay, so but if you change it to block, now the height will be given to it. So it is getting the height because you have changed it to block. Okay, so what are the differences? So basically if you write it anything as block, that is going to take the entire block, entire line, entire width. Okay, if it is inline, it will allow the other elements to come after it. It will not take the entire row. Okay, and when you are trying to set the height and width, you can set the height and width only to block display, not to inline display. Okay, so let's see one more example. So we have, so I think you have to apply this to P. So now we have two paragraph elements. Okay, and two paragraph elements are displayed one after the other because they are by default block. Now let's change them to inline. If you change the block to inline, then you can see that it is both are actually using up this space. Now one element is not taking up the entire space. Okay, let's see one more example. So here we have two paragraph elements which have been given height and width. Because they are block, they will take height and width, and then we have given a background color. Now already they are block. Now if an element is already a block display, then again if you apply block display, nothing will happen. Okay, now if you see that, no changes, it is as it is. You cannot, if it is already block, you are changing it to block, nothing will happen. Okay, let's see the next example. So there are two paragraphs, hello world, they are displayed, they are made inline. When they are made inline, you are actually writing them side by side because they are inline now. Now to an element which is inline, if I apply height and width, then it will not take those properties. It will ignore those properties. To inline, you cannot give height and width. But if you remove this inline line, then they are by default block. Now you can see that height and width are applied. Okay. And now there are two paragraphs. So paragraphs are block by default, and therefore you can apply height and width. Now let's see what happens. So now what we have done here is we have used something called as inline block. Now what does inline block do is elements will appear inline, just like how it appears in inline side by side, but you can also set the height and width. That is the meaning of this combination. When you combine both inline and block, the elements will be inline. All of them will be side by side without taking up the entire space because of inline. But because of block, you can now set the height and width of it. Okay, you can now set the height and width of it. That is why we got height and width of both of them. So this hello class here, hello is in class A, and for that A class, height and width is given. And now for the world, height and width is not given. So you can set the height and width to the inline block, which means we are getting a combination of both of them. They are appearing inline and they are taking the height and width. That is why they are block. So that is why they are inline block. Okay. And now let us see one more display property called as none. So when you say none, then the element will disappear completely. For example, here, maybe to the paragraph, not to the paragraph, give it to class, because both of them will disappear. Okay. So give it to only one of them. You make one of them H1. So when we apply none to both of them, they will disappear. So now let us apply display of none to paragraph. Now you can see that the paragraph disappeared. Okay. So why should we write an element and hide it? Why are we actually making it disappear? Because there are certain applications which need it. For example, maybe you have given some options to the user and he has to click on one of them, and once he click on one of them, that should disappear. Okay. Or there will be many cases like that. So sometimes when you are actually doing a responsive design, when you are making the size of the screen smaller, then you want some of the elements to disappear. So for that purpose, this display none is used. Okay, thank you. Hi, in this video, let us see float and clear properties. So I will show you with example. I'll show you an example here. For example, you had newspapers. Now also you have newspapers, right? But the way the content is organized in newspapers is in such a way that they don't want to waste any space. When there is a lot of text and when there are images, you cannot write all the images and then the text. You are going to wrap it. See, for example, there is an image and the text is wrapping it. Okay. So there are multiple blocks here. There are different blocks, and in every block, the text is actually wrapping the image. This will save a lot of space, and many modern websites are inspired by newspapers and they want to follow the same way when there is a lot of text on the website. For that, we can use float. I'll show you the example. So let's look at this example. Now we have a picture of tiger and then some text is there which is in a paragraph, and then a footer is there. Footer is generally used to write this copyright information. Generally when you look at a website, at the end of everything there will be footer, and in the footer they will write copyright something, right? Copyright Microsoft, copyright 2023, something like that. Okay, so that is why footer is used. So footer should always appear at the bottom. Now if you observe this, for whatever code we have written in HTML, picture is coming here, text is coming here, and footer is coming here, right? So just drag it. Yeah, now if you observe it, there is some space after this image which is actually not used. Okay, completely not used. Now how can we make in such a way that this text is going to wrap the image? For that we can use float. For the image, if you give float left, then the image will float left side and the text will come in the right side. Now you can see that, drag it. So you can see that the image is floated to the left, and just drag it. And the text is here. But the problem is this footer, instead of, it should not wrap. Okay, footer should not wrap. Footer should be at the down. How can you enable it? Because everything is wrapping the image. Whatever is present in the website, it is all going into the and wrapping there. So how can we see that footer is not wrapped and footer appears at the down? So for that you can give clear left. Since you have given float left to the image, you have to give clear left. Okay, so now you can see that, drag it. You can see that footer is below the image. It is not going there. Okay, now you can also see that the image floats to the right and the text goes to the left. Okay, so for that you can give float right. If you give float right, now if you drag it, so image has gone to the right and the text is here, and again footer is coming up. Why? Because we have to do clear right here. Now if you do clear right, footer will come down. Footer has come down. Okay, and the text is here and the image is here. So depending on your requirement, you can put the image in the left or right, see which one is looking good, and then wrap the text. Okay, thank you.